Hey there, Successful Mama. I've been thinking about the holidays and this year and how we are stressed and overwhelmed and burnt out. And I was like, what do you need right now? So I went back through and looked at the top episodes and I realized that is what you need because that is what you are listening to. So we are going to review the top 3 episodes of all time and remind ourselves how our brain works. And we do what we can with the capacity that we have right now. And while I try to incorporate actual action steps in each episode, if that's too much right now, no worries. Just listen and learn and lower the bar. When we get into January, we'll get back in the swing of things. And yes, we'll jump back on that horse. But for now, let's just enjoy the little moments that are here in this holiday season and do our best not to lose our ever-loving minds. I hope that you find time to both celebrate and rest. So here we are, one of the top 3 episodes of the podcast. Enjoy and happy holidays.
Do you lash out like a wounded beast more often than you'd like? Are you an expert in fiercely bottling in your feelings so that no one can tell the difference between your insides being totally fine and volcano eruption status? Do your feelings go from 0 to 100 in a blink of an eye? And then back again just a short time later. These are all part of your executive function, specifically emotional regulation. I left all of the regulation parts of executive function to the end of the series because they are doozies. Get ready to learn about your brain. Are you overwhelmed by motherhood and barely keeping your head above water? Are you confused and frustrated by how all the other moms make it look so easy? You can't figure out how to manage the chaos in your mind, your home, or your family. I get you, mama. Parenting with ADHD is hard. Here is your permission slip to let go of the Pinterest-worthy visions of organization and structure fit for everyone else. Let's do life like our brains do life. Creatively, lovingly, and with all our might. When we embrace who we are and how our brains work, we can figure out how to live our lives successfully. And in turn, lead our families well. At the end of the day, we just want to be good moms. But, spoiler alert, you are already a great mom. ADHD does not mean you're doomed to be a hot mess, mama. You can rewrite your story from shame spiral to success story. And I'll be right here beside you to cheer you on. Welcome to Motherhood in ADHD.
Hey there, Successful Mama. It's your friend Patricia Sung. Have you ever asked yourself, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get my it together? Why am I constantly stressed? Why does it always feel like something's going wrong? We are at the tail end of our executive function series. And executive function is the CEO of your brain. It runs everything. And I really can't explain ADHD if I don't mention executive functioning. If you're not familiar with it, you can go back and listen to the first episode in the series, which is number 53, for an overview. And as we wrap up, we're talking about all the types of regulation. Well, this week is emotional regulation. Emotional regulation includes temper control problems, affective lability, and emotional overreactivity. Now, I was like, what's lability? So I had to look it up. Emotional lability is a sign or symptom typified by exaggerated changes in mood or affect in quick succession. Sometimes the emotions expressed outwardly are very different from how the person feels on the inside. These strong emotions can be disproportionate response to something that happened, but other times there might be no trigger at all. The person experiencing emotional lability usually feels like they do not have control over their emotions. For example, someone might cry uncontrollably in response to any strong emotion, even if they don't feel sad or unhappy. It can also be an associated feature of ADHD. Children who display a high degree of emotional lability generally have a low frustration tolerance and frequent crying spells or tantrums. During preschool, ADHD with emotional lability is associated with increased impairment and may be a sign of internalizing problems or multiple comorbid disorders. Y'all, can I just tell you that on my kindergarten report card, it said, Trisha cries a lot. Red flag, y'all. Now, they thought that I was a crier because I was not emotionally mature enough to be in kindergarten. I'm actually quite young for the grade level that I was in, but I was smart, so they didn't want to hold me back. Well, don't you know, when you have ADHD, you tend to be behind when you talk about like a maturity level. So not only was I significantly younger than everyone in the grade, I also was less mature emotionally speaking than even kids my own age who were in the grade below. Ay, ay, ay. Now I want to go back a little bit earlier in that definition where it says, sometimes the emotions expressed outwardly are very different from how the person feels on the inside. Sometimes when I'm feeling a really strong emotional response, and it's probably around bedtime, that's usually when it gets the worst, when my meds are starting to wear off, and the way that I react to the situation, it's almost like an out-of-body experience. Like I can see myself being really upset about the situation, like my 3-year-old taking 400 years to brush his teeth, when if this was happening at 9 a.m., I would just be like, yep, he's 3, and coax him along with what we need to get done. But when my emotions are dysregulated towards the end of the day, I'm getting so frustrated that he's not doing what I want him to do. And I can see almost like I'm stepping back and watching this crazy level of frustration over something that wouldn't necessarily bother me at another time in the day. And I love the example where it says someone might cry uncontrollably even if they're not sad. Like for me, like when I get nervous, I laugh uncontrollably. So if something terrible is happening, I'm probably laughing. And it's really awkward and it's always at a very bad time. But to sum it up, we get angry easier, we get frustrated easier, our emotions ramp up quickly, and our outward response doesn't necessarily match the inside feelings or the level of the problem. Now, as a side note, emotions are not included in the current DSM, which is the list of diagnostic criteria that doctors use to diagnose ADHD. Why? Because you can't measure emotion. There's no like, oh, that person's at a level 3 emotion, but if they would have hit a level 5, that would have been ADHD. Well, no, you can't just stick a number on something. My level 5 is going to be different than your level 5 and is different to the next person's level 5. And also, who's to say what a level 5 is? This is why a clinical interview is so important in the diagnosis process, to go through the history and see these emotional patterns, because you can't measure emotions. In an article by David W. Goodman, ND, he says emotional dysregulation can be defined by excessive expression and experience of emotions with rapid and poorly controlled shift and emotions and abnormal allocation of attention to emotional stimuli. Is this a dysfunction with the accelerator, in parentheses, the rapidity of emotional intensity, or the lack of brakes, which in parentheses is leading to impulsive expression? I feel like it's one of those like chicken and the egg things. Science hasn't figured out what's causing it, but we're clearly having a problem. When I looked at Dr. Brown's 2 themes, he discusses a low tolerance for frustration and a chronic difficulty in regulating subjective emotional experience and expression. Now, keep in mind, all of these resources that I am citing, they are going to be on my website, so you can go look them up and read these articles and do some investigating yourself at patriciasung.com/podcast. If it's too much for you, you don't need to go read those. But if you're somebody who loves to dig into the nitty-gritty, I want you to have those resources, because I work really hard to find quality science-backed information for you, that it's not just random jibber-jabber on the internet. I mean, I could just random jibber-jabber by myself if I wanted, but I want you to have good information so that you're learning quality science about your brain. Now, separately, I was reading this article in the Smithsonian Magazine, which talks about fear. And it says, fear reaction starts in the brain and spreads through the body to make adjustments for the best defense, or flight reaction. The fear response starts in the region of the brain called the amygdala. Sound familiar? It goes on to say, this almond-shaped set of nuclei in the temporal lobe of the brain is dedicated to detecting the emotional salience of the stimuli, how much something stands out to us. For example, the amygdala activates whenever we see a human face with an emotion. This reaction is more pronounced with anger and fear. A threat stimulus, such as the sight of a predator, triggers a fear response in the amygdala, which activates areas involved in preparation for motor functions involved in fight or flight. It also triggers release of stress hormones in the sympathetic nervous system. Now, isn't it interesting that fear starts in the amygdala, which is one of the areas of the brain that is affected by ADHD? We spend a lot of time in that fight or flight response because our body has all this extra stimuli and we're constantly processing extra information and like ready to go, which I think back in the day when we were not farmers but hunter-gatherers was probably a really great skill, but not so helpful when you're in a desk job. Even though there isn't a ton of knowledge or research in terms of scientific studies, which require a significant amount of protocols to be considered official scientific research, We, those with ADHD, can clearly tell you that emotional dysregulation is a big problem. How do we see this show up in our lives as an adult with ADHD? Often that low-level irritation should equal a low-level frustration, but for us it doesn't. We hit that medium and high frustration level at small things. We can hit a high frustration level at just about any irritation. There's an overwhelming intensity of feelings. We lose sight of the other priorities, like the other people's feelings around us or the consequences of our actions. Dr. Brown calls it a computer virus that takes up all of our mental capacity, that we can't think about anything else except that particular stimuli. And I think part of it, side note, just my opinion, is that because we're processing so much information all the time, everything's kind of this like overload of information with the constant barrage of incoming messages, that our body has trouble filtering out what's really a problem and what's not. And that's where the messages get mixed up, because our brain is just so busy processing way more messages than it needs to, that there's constantly going to be a flare-up of like, oh, what about that? That's scary. What about that? Oh, what's about that? And so our brain never has a chance to calm down and say, hey, we don't have to worry about that. It's not a problem. We can filter that out before we get upset. So just kind of my like side processing of, patterns I've seen in what I've been researching. Okay, back on topic. The other ways that we can see this show up as an adult, our feelings go from 0 to 10 right away and then back again. We have a lot of anger, so road rage or yelling at our kids, being super frustrated when there probably is a quote unquote simple solution. Many of us have Rejection Sensitivity Dysphoria, or RSD, which means we overanalyze how other people feel and disproportionately feel like we caused it or we did something wrong, and then we send ourselves into this like anxious spiral, analyzing what happened or what was said. We hit that sensory overload quite often. All the noises, the textures, the light. We may not necessarily have a sensory processing disorder, that's different, but definitely sensory overload. Now, just as a side note, in case you're not familiar with sensory processing disorders, that's referring to the way your nervous system receives messages from the senses and then turns them into a response. So if you have a sensory processing disorder, the information goes into your brain, but it doesn't get organized into the appropriate response. So if you have SBD, you don't have any issue detecting the information. It gets mixed up in your brain and then your response doesn't match. But keep in mind that this is also one of ADHD's comorbid friends, and it is common for people with ADHD to have both ADHD and a sensory processing disorder. So even though the signals might not get mixed up in our head, there might just be too many signals. That would be sensory overload. So eye contact can feel overwhelming. We can feel hyper empathetic to someone telling us a story of what happened. We feel the emotions like the person who was there. It could be books or movies. Over the years, I've had to filter out a lot of things that aren't good for me to do. Like I used to love horror movies, but now I realize that they're just not good for my system. The level of stress that I feel in that movie and the nightmares I'm going to have later, it's not worth the entertainment factor at the time. I've had to let those go, which is sad. I really did like horror movies, but I realized that they're just not that good for me. Another part of this is that we often don't experience joy to the same level as neurotypical people. We downplay our achievements and we don't feel the same satisfaction after we achieve a goal. So we work really hard to get something, we achieve it, and it's like, oh, yep, well, I did that. What's next? Because where we get that dopamine hit is in the process of chasing the goal and getting there. Actually getting the goal doesn't really give us much of a dopamine release. Another area where emotional dysregulation really shows up is in women and their cycle. I can remember a time early in our marriage where I had to send my husband calendar invites that said, "Don't mess with Patricia," about 3 or 4 days before my period started, because my husband would pick at a fight more than it needed to be. We were newlyweds and everything felt like it should be a battle. We've learned a lot since then, now that we've been married for 10 years. But that way he knew, like, if you have a big problem, this is not the time to bring this up a few days before my period. You need to hold on to that till later, or you need to talk about it beforehand. But don't bring it up in the danger week. You're just going to get a very illogical Patricia who yells a lot of angry things and is not based in anything real or logic. I would do a lot of general blaming statements like, you always do this and you never do this. And that's not true. He didn't always do that or never do this or whatever. But emotionally dysregulated Patricia was not logical in, anything, but especially in fights. Now, I watched a really great webinar last night about hormones and women with ADHD by Dr. Sandra Cooey, and I'm going to link that in the show notes, and I mentioned it last week. But there is a definitive correlation between women's cycles and the hormone levels and ADHD. I won't get all into what I talked about last week because then, that's going to be another long episode. But we do need to be aware that as our hormones change, estrogen is tied to our dopamine, and as our estrogen is lowering right before our cycles and during our cycle, our ADHD symptoms are going to appear more of a nuisance, just a bigger problem overall. One thing that I really hadn't heard much about at all is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which a lot of ADHD women deal with. In Dr. Cooey's presentation, she said 3 to 8% of women have PMDD, and it is almost tenfold that in women with ADHD. That's a huge part of our population. This is where women who right before their cycles, their mood swings are out of control. Their rage, crying, extremely sensitive to rejections, interpreting things the wrong way, snapping, yelling, anxious, really low motivation, wanting to control everything because so much is out of control. They're trying to pull in what they can, feeling lethargic, or fighting with people all the time. It's like PMS on steroids. But what a lot of women don't want to share because it's scary is that a lot of these women also have suicidal thoughts and safety concerns in this time. My heart breaks for how many of you are struggling with this and are too afraid to say something because it makes you sound like an awful mother. I so want to encourage you in this moment to say that you are a wonderful mother, and this is something that is not in your control. This is not you. This is not who you are. This is not your value. I want you to hear that loud and clear, and I want you to know that you are beautiful and loved, even when your emotions are out of control, that there is help out there, that you are not the only one who deals with this, and you can have a plan to mitigate this, because if you know it's coming, you can make a plan. I love Dr. Cooey's saying of, when you're aware, you can prepare. An awesome lady named Emerald shared her PMDD plan with me so that I could share it with you all. And she runs through the warning signs, which are the ones I just read to you. Those are her words. She talks about her internal coping of what she can do to deal when she's feeling overwhelmed with all of this. So like taking a break, laying down and snuggling with a stuffed animal or a pet, praying, just cry it out, exercise, take a shower, journal, paint. What is it that's going to bring you inner calm in that time? Then she's got distractions she could do to, get her mind off of it, of running errands or phoning a friend, asking her family for a hug. She also included who she can contact when she's struggling. So family and friends that she can reach out to and, make a phone call and say, hey, I'm having a bad day. Can you support me right now? She has written down her professional contacts, so her doctors, her therapists, support group leaders that she can talk to. And then how she can reduce safety concerns. So sharp objects need to be out of reach. Any medicines, give them to someone else. Don't drive in your car. And then she has written down the time period before her period where she knows these things start appearing and making a note of, okay, I need to be watching my tracker on my phone of when it's coming, and then using medicine to lessen symptoms and what can she do to naturally boost her energy and mood, because she has a plan and she's written it out. Like on her calendar, she has written like, these are the danger days of where things are going to go awry. And here's where my cycle starts. Because she has a plan in place, how much more likely is it that she is going to be successful in mitigating the struggles during this time? We're not going to make them disappear, but when you know it's coming, you can figure out what works for you and have that plan ready so that when you start to struggle, you're not in panic mode. It's in, okay, let me get out my plan and see which of these ideas sounds good right now because I got to pick one. So this emotional dysregulation is so common for us women. And other people are going to interpret this in some rough ways of us being angry or sad or crazy or weird or too sensitive or too picky. All of the negative reputations that women have, like they're all in here on this one. And it is crazy the number of women who are diagnosed with things like bipolar or depression and anxiety before the ADHD is recognized. They may have those things as well, but a lot of times that bipolar is coming out because of that shift in the hormones and around your cycle, not because you actually have bipolar disorder. So be aware that that's a very common misconception is they're looking for like, okay, what's making this person fly all over the place in terms of their emotions? That's a much easier, obvious diagnosis than the ADHD, which is definitely not studied as much as a lot of other mental health issues. So let's turn this around to a positive note. We are kind and helpful and empathetic humans. We feel for other people and we understand people well. And when we're truly connected in, we can make such a great difference in the world around us in helping others. This is a gift that we have and that we can use to make the world a better place. Not just on a grand scale, but with the people in our lives, the people that we love, the people that are close to us, and reaching out and being willing to say, hey, I struggle too. I'm here for you. That is a gift that we have that we can use for so much good. Hey mama, have you been over to my website and grabbed any of the free ADHD resources I've got? You can make your mornings more peaceful, overcome time blindness hurdles, learn ways to treat your ADHD beyond the obvious medication option, or grab a copy of all of my favorite ADHD resources on one page. You can snag these all on my website at patriciasung.com/resources, and I'll email you the PDF or the video. Now, don't go putting in your spammy junk email, okay? I'm not going to send you junk. I email you once, maybe twice a week. For sure, I'll send you a note about this week's podcast topic, and if I'm having a particularly organized week, I might email you again about what's working for my ADHD this week, or venting about whatever executive function disaster happened. Your inbox is where I spill more of the beans, and if you change your mind, you can always unsubscribe, right? Plus, I really love hearing back from you, so write me an email back. Tell me what's going on in your life, or what you want to learn about next. So go grab those free goodies, and I'll see you in your inbox. So what is my connection with emotional dysregulation? Well, I've told you quite a bit already, but sensory overload is definitely a struggle for me, especially with my kids. The noise level when you have small kids is just overwhelming, especially when they were younger. It's a little bit better now, but when they were younger, this being touched all the time, I'm like, please, nobody else touch me. Please, just leave me alone. It's too much. This can take a big toll on our relationships when other people can feel like they are the cause of our discomfort, whether or not we mean it that way or not. It can definitely take a toll on others when they feel like they're the cause of our struggle. We don't have to say it out loud. People can feel that. I feel awful when I get abruptly angry with my kids over something that's, seems little, and it just kind of comes out of nowhere. And I have learned to take time for myself and when I need that extra space to let the sensory overload come down. And I'm okay telling my kids, I need a second. I'm very frustrated and I am not frustrated with you, but I need some space for a couple of minutes and get them situated safely for a few minutes so that I can take a couple minutes and take some space for myself. And as a mom, obviously we're dealing with our own kids, and an escalated adult cannot de-escalate an escalated child. So when your kids are struggling, which let's be honest, it's way more likely that our kids have ADHD if we do, when we're trying to help them and then we're getting upset too, how can an upset person make someone else calm? It doesn't happen. So we have quite the task on our hands to rein in our emotions so that we can help rein in theirs. Now, whether or not you take medicine is your choice, but that is something that I have seen a huge difference above all the other things. And I mean, it's great to be productive and what have you, but to me, the most important difference in my life is that emotional regulation that I get when I'm taking medicine. It is so much better when I'm on medicine, especially that like witching hour before bedtime where life is rough. When I'm on the wrong medicine, that time is worse. When I'm not on medicine, that time is worse. When I'm on the right medicine, that really helps that bedtime hour go far more smoothly because I'm more in control and can take a step back and look at things objectively and be like, okay, he's just being a toddler. I'm not going to take it personally. And I can pause and take that breath before I react. But if you are not on medicine, fear not. I do have a whole list of resources on my website, and one of them is a non-medicine idea list of what you can do to treat your ADHD if you're not wanting to focus on medicine. Because medicine is just one item in our toolkit. It's not the end-all be-all. It's not a magic fairy wand. So whether you're taking medicine or not, you should be implementing all of these other skills, strategies, etc. into your life that you can. Because every time you implement something that's better for you, you're doing better in the long run. So you can go to the website and grab that download, patriciasung.com/resources. They're all there. So what are my hacks for this? Well, as I've said in every one of these executive functioning episodes, is awareness. Just knowing where you struggle, where this is repetitively hard for you. You will grow an awareness of it, and you can make a plan for those times that are hard. We also have to take care of ourselves to lower our load. If we keep overloading frequently, then we're going to be triggered more frequently. So we have to know how we can lower our frustration meter in order to keep it down. You have to know your triggers. And then create your plan for when you feel overloaded, when you feel overwhelmed, when things are feeling out of control. What are you going to do? That list that I gave you from Emerald is a great starting place of where you can start to brainstorm what would make sense for you. I love CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. I have made huge strides in my anger process, like slowing that down and understanding what to do when I feel angry, but also being able to voice my opinion earlier so that I don't get as angry because I'm frustrated later. So it's the combination of I'm getting angry, how do I slow that down, but also doing things differently at the beginning so that I don't get as angry. Another part that's really helpful is just treating your ADHD as a whole. When you have it more under control, it allows you to work on the other parts of the problem, especially emotional dysregulation. It's hard to monitor your emotions if you're too tired or too sleepy or overloaded or all the other things that go on. If you're not treating the other issues that you have, if you're not treating your depression, if you're not treating your anxiety, you're not treating your OCD, you're not treating your learning disabilities, all of those things are adding fuel to the fire. So the more that you can work on the different pieces, the more overall it gets better. So it's frustrating. It's like that chicken or the egg. It's like, well, if, I wasn't so frustrated, I could make this better. But if I made this better, I wouldn't be so frustrated. I get it. But know that every little bit that you're making progress on is making the end result better. So don't discount the work that you're doing. It is making a difference. Another habit that I've gotten into is accurately labeling my feelings, like getting to the root of something. Sometimes we're not even quite sure why we're mad. We're just mad. So if we can dig down to what the actual problem is and get to the root, that's how we're going to solve the problem. Solving the symptoms isn't going to solve the actual problem. We're just band-aiding. So when you're really frustrated with your kids and dig down why am I frustrated? They're not listening to me. Why are they not listening to me? They're too tired. Okay, well, what can I do about that? Do I need to start bedtime earlier? Can I prep some stuff earlier in the day so that bedtime goes faster? There's things you can do to lessen the problems when you have a plan to work ahead. But getting to that root of, I'm so angry. Why? Because I'm frustrated. Why? Because I'm feeling disrespected by my kids. Okay, well now here we need to work on the respect issue, not the anger issue. I mean, we do need to work on the anger issue. Let me not mince words here. But if we deal with the respect issue, that's going to create less frustration and less anger down the road. So just keep asking yourself well, why do I feel that way? Well, why do I feel that way? And get down to that root issue. And as ADHD women, there's a pretty good chance that we have spent a really long time ignoring and doubting our own feelings because we've been told our whole lives we're too much, too emotional, too sensitive. And we have to unlearn that doubt that we have in ourselves of truly listening to what we feel, knowing that our feelings are valid and true, and trusting that what we feel inside is right. Especially if you've had trauma as a child, you learn to doubt your feelings and you were trained to ignore them and that you are wrong, that you don't feel that way. That person harmed you in so many ways, and I am so sorry, and I wish I could give you the biggest hug ever. But we have to unlearn that. We have to unlearn
all of that awfulness that's been there in the past that taught us that we don't know what we feel and that we are incorrect. So that is going to take time and probably professional help to get through that. And you deserve that, and you are valuable, and you are worth the time, energy, and effort that goes into therapy in order to know who you truly are and trust your feelings and do what's best for you. So, sweet mama, we have one more regulation to cover, which is self-regulation. And then we'll be finished with our executive function series, which I'm kind of sad. This has been, I would say, half fun and half hard, but I've loved learning about the nuances that are in our brains because knowledge is power. And the more that we know about who we are and how our brain works, that allows us to focus on our strengths and use them for our good and bumper pad the weaknesses that we have. And when we understand who we are, we can feel confident in running our lives with purpose. We're not trying to change who we are. We're trying to find ways to make life fit us, not the other way around. So you have an amazing week, and I will talk to you next week for our last installment of Executive Functioning. For more resources, classes, and community, head over to my website, motherhoodinadhd.com.